Welcome back, my lords and ladies, to the Cast Beyond the Wall. We are your guide to all things Westerosi, and we're here to bring you a review, analysis, and fan v fan debate on each episode of HBO's Game of Thrones successor series, House of the Dragon. In today's discussion, we're going to provide you with our initial review and reactions of the House of the Dragon Season 1 episode, The Princess and the Queen, before providing a breakdown of the story and a scene-by-scene recap. And then we'll close out the show by speculating about what we think might happen next, and, as always, assigning a winner, a loser, and a wildcard player from this week's episode. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and I have to say, I really thought that we all learned that spoiled rich kids could not be trusted by a window in a high tower after we watched Succession. Okay. I thought HBO learned the lesson that audiences don't want to see that. And yet, here we are. And joining me, as always, from the Riverlands of Southern Illinois. Sir, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Daniel. And Caleb, I have a question for you actually this week. Have you ever thought about time traveling?
Daniel, you know me. I live in time travel stories. Like my brain, that's how it operates. Of course.
You know, I've thought a lot about it too. And unfortunately, I find myself in an interesting position where I feel like this episode has shown me why I shouldn't do large leaps of jumping between time, because it doesn't always land the way that you think it might. So there's a little spoiler for where maybe my thoughts are going this episode.
So this is like the movie The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, except for instead of a girl, it's House of the Dragon. And instead of landing on the ground in a different time zone, she trips and falls and breaks her neck. Is that what you're implying?
Okay. Maybe not breaks her neck, but she stumbles as she lands. But she's okay. You know, we're still okay. But there's a little bit of a stumble, I think, as she landed.
Maybe a slight ankle sprain.
Yeah, I was going to say there are points taken off for the landing. I would agree with that.
Wasn't a perfect landing. You know, we had to take some points off, but we're still okay. You know, we still have a chance.
Okay. The neck breaking was probably a little extreme. But I just had to check the worst case scenario here to make sure we get there. And as you have already heard the incredible voice, ladies and gentlemen, we're so excited to be rejoined by former guest co-host, Lainey of House James. Lainey James, welcome back to the Cast Beyond the Wall.
Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, Daniel. I'm excited to be here. You know I love to share my opinion, especially on all things geekly and Casterly, as in Casterly Rock. You know, the Lannisters send their regrets. Or regards.
Their regrets.
Or their regards. Their regards. Oh. Sorry. I'm
tipping your hand.
I fumbled the line. The Lannisters send their regards.
Well, and you are located in SoCal, which I think geographically roughly amalgamates to the Lannisport, sort of. It's on the southwest side of Westeros, right? So it checks out.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of places that are probably as intriguing and political as Westeros and the Red Keep, for sure.
Well, Lainey, it's been too long. 3.5 years since Game of Thrones wrapped up, and I know we've been talking all season long of House of the Dragon. Is the show actually any good? We're here on episode 6, so apparently we thought it was good enough to at least get this far, but I have to ask you, what have your thoughts been on the season 1 of House of the Dragon so far?
I've really enjoyed it. I have enjoyed the political intrigue. I know some of our chat before we got started is that I was looking forward to more dragons and kind of some more of the lure of dragons. And that's where I feel the show has fallen a little bit short at times, because they play a major part to the legacy of the Targaryens and their power. I mean, Rhaenyra says it herself, without our dragons, we're just like anyone else. And they really haven't gotten into that yet. So that's been a really slow burn, but I do hope it pays off a little bit more. We're getting a little bit more, but I mean, I want to learn more about the Dragon Keepers. Who are these guys that are smudged and blackened themselves because they spend so much time in a dragon pit? And, since the dragons are a huge part and have their own bonds and ties with the characters, like, I'm a little bit disappointed we haven't seen Rhaenyra on the back of her dragon. So much so that I would have to rack my brain to remember what her dragon's name is at the moment. So
I can tell you the last time we saw her on it, I'm 99% sure was episode 2 when she goes to Dragonstone to confront Daemon. But even that was a tease, really. You know, we haven't really seen her do anything cool on her dragon yet. She's threatened to do some cool stuff, and I was like, please threaten me with cool stuff. But she hasn't really gone on. And honestly, to your point, Lainey, this actually does factor into reviews for this episode because there are rules about dragons and dragon eggs that I feel like have been really squishy or ambiguous. They haven't really laid it out. I'm not saying I want someone to monologue at me, but there are subtle ways I feel like they could lay out like, hey, we have a very finite number of dragons. The assumption I had from the earlier episodes is new Targaryen, they have a dragon egg. It's like this weird sort of symmetry. Maybe it's magical that they happen to have the right number of eggs. I wasn't sure. Well, as we find out in this episode, apparently there are a finite number of dragon eggs and not all the Targaryens get them. And that's like one of a small, very small detail related to what you're talking about, which is who are the people who keep the dragon eggs? How long does it take a dragon to grow? When are they going to battle? Have you liked the new characters as much as, say, characters from Game of Thrones?
Let me think about this a second. I would say yes. I mean, there are, to me, a few people that are as compelling as, Arya Stark and Sansa. And now, because we saw her character development. And so it's kind of I know I've read the books, but it's kind of a wait and see. I do love the fact that some of the women and the men in House of the Dragon ride dragons. These are the actual dragon riders and everything that goes with it. And of course, I feel like we've got our Littlefinger and Larys already, so I think there are some parallels for sure.
He's finally here. I thought it was going to be Daemon, but I was wrong. It's Larys.
It's Larys, and I thought, this is going to be Caleb's favorite character.
I just need a shadow player to be really smart and play both sides and do terrible things. That's all I want out of Game of Thrones, okay?
He's already got his little network of spies with his, the beetle or whatever it was that was on his ring, and then on the pins on. Spoiler alert! I know we're jumping forward into the episode, but so I see parallels. But of course, history does repeat itself, and even in the land of Westerosi.
Let me just kind of put a pin in like just your overall sort of thoughts of the season so far. Are you excited to continue watching? So we're 6 episodes in, 4 left after this week, and then we have already been renewed for season 2. Are you so into it that you're ready to keep going all the way through?
For sure, I'm excited. But of course, I have read the books, or the book Fire and Blood, a couple of times, or I should say, I listened to it, so I do know what happens, and there's some pretty explosive and fiery things that happen in the future. No spoilers, but it is like anything from George R. Martin. Don't get too attached and prepare to have your heart broken.
I am ready for the heartbreak. Break it right now. Daniel, you got to protect me, okay? I'm getting too invested here.
I'll do my best.
All right. Lainey, again, as always, just a pleasure to talk with you in general, but thanks for taking time out of your Monday evening to talk House of the Dragon. Now, listeners, before we get into our discussion of this week's episode, I want to remind you that you can track all of our posts on our social media channels, including our Twitter page at cast_beyond_GOT and our Facebook page at facebook.com/cast beyond the wall. But honestly, the more important thing you could do, really more important than the social media, is really by engaging with us on your preferred podcast app, most specifically Spotify or Apple are the two big ones. And you can leave us a rating and a review on Apple or on Spotify. Once you finish listening to an episode, you can just rate us. Go in, give us 5 stars. It literally takes you 30 seconds. You need to do it via the mobile app. There's a little star icon right under the title of the podcast page there. Toss a review to your, I don't know where I was going with the Witcher analogy, but toss a coin to your Game of Thrones podcasters over here.
Daniel and I were wondering too.
Oh, I know. I lost it halfway through. Darn. Well, I'm sure Henry Cavill he can forgive me. Last thing, Lainey, I want to say congratulations. You are the first one of our guests who has read in full Fire and Blood. So that makes you the most knowledgeable person of the source material to be on the show yet this season. I'm only a mere 150 pages into the novel, and I haven't made any progress in about 3 weeks. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say it's a tougher read than A Song of Fire and Ice. So I'm not surprised you're only 150 pages in. I felt like I needed a flow chart to understand it when I first, that's why I've read it twice.
It is definitely, it reads a lot more like a historical document than Game of Thrones or a Song of Ice and Fire series, rather. Because those are all like first person POV, and technically you still have like a somewhat unreliable quote unquote narrator in the fact that like we don't know how much we can trust what the historians have documented, but it's definitely a lot more on the dry side for sure. With that said, though, Lainey, and mostly for listeners out there, I need to disclaim that we will not be spoiling any future events on House of the Dragon, and at most we may talk very briefly about the next time on, if we even go that far. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our discussion covering the Princess and the Queen.
We should address the latest developments in the Stepstones, my lords.
Where, I wonder, is our Prince Daemon?
It was a decade ago, and he has since left the region undefended.
We have left it undefended. My queen?
What are children but a weakness? Through them, you imagine you will persist forever.
You will be our king. We are the blood of old Valyria.
But for them, you surrender what you should not. A father compromised by the acts of a son.
To have one child like that is a mistake. To have three is an insult.
People have eyes.
The consequences of an allegation like the one you twirled would be dire.
Dracarys!
So according to IMDb, the official synopsis for The Princess and the Queen reads, 10 years later, Rhaenyra navigates Alicent's continued speculation about her children, while Daemon and Laena weigh an offer in Pentos. I want to quickly note this episode was written by Sarah Hess and directed by the executive producer Miguel Sapochnik. Fun fact, way more women behind the scenes this season of House of the Dragon, which is so refreshing.
And it really shows in this episode and previous episodes on how birth is portrayed as a parent and who is given birth. That I was like, oh yeah, all of this happens, and and we'll get into some of my opinions about that later. I don't want to jump ahead of our conversation.
Yes, so much to talk about. Well, let's just go ahead and start off with our general reactions. Thumbs up, thumbs down. What did we think of the episode? What did we like? What didn't we like? Daniel Stahl, throwing it to you first. What were your thoughts on The Princess and the Queen?
I was actually a little surprised in my own reaction. I thought the last two episodes had been really excellent, and so I was kind of riding high coming into this episode, and I feel like I cooled off a little bit with this episode. I think that that's not to say it's bad. I think it was a solid episode, but in a lot of ways, it almost felt like a new pilot in the way that it was presented, and that was a little jarring at times. Some of the characters I felt like were almost new, felt a little bit like new characters in some of the scenes, and I was like feeling, it's a little jarring. I think the 10 years was a lot. That's not, again, it's not to say that it was bad. I wasn't prepared, I guess, for that jump as much as I thought I was, even though I knew it was coming. But overall, I think it was a solid episode. Not great. I think this is the episode I probably have the most qualms with so far of the season. But again, I think there's some really great highs that it still hits, and I am still ready to continue. I'm not like jumping ship or anything like that.
So you generally like it with a number of reservations, largely related to the time jump, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. Lainey James, what did you think of this week's episode?
I wish I could say I had a viscerally different reaction than Daniel, but I have to say I really agree with his assessment. As a matter of fact, in my notes, I wrote down transition was jarring as well, and what you said, Daniel, about it feeling like they're new characters, but really it's 10 years later, and it's really just new actors portraying them. And so I thought the character development and kind of seeing where they came from to where they are now, it just seemed very disconnected a little bit to me. That being said, I want to see what happens next.
This is boring because we all agree. This is the first episode where I was like, ugh, we've talked about the time jumps pretty much every episode to certain degrees about, we skipped ahead 6 months, or we skipped ahead 3 years. This was the first episode where as you pointed out, Lainey, the disconnect was almost too much for me. And what I mean is, these characters made some really big decisions when we weren't watching them. So we have Rhaenyra decide to have 3 kids, it's just far enough away that I'm like, I want to see the episode where she comes around to that a little bit more. Daemon, who you can hear me in the last episode, was like, all right, he's on the political up and up. He's scheming. He just stole all his dead wife's lands. I was like, oh, he's in the game now. Apparently decided to just retire his political career and go to Pentos and live it up. I'm not saying that's a bad direction for him to go. It just seemed very disconnected from what I saw in the last episode, where we jumped ahead and characters in the 10 years, which is a long time, made decisions that I couldn't quite wrap my head around based on what we had previously seen. So with that said, it really left me feeling a little cold. I just wasn't as invested in these new characters. And then the other thing about that is, again, time jump wise, there's a huge disconnect, but I also really felt like it messed with the pacing. Daniel, you described it as a new pilot. Well, that's the thing. There was all this stuff that happened over 10 years, and we basically got reintroduced to everyone and had to learn about through monologuing or shorthand explanations. Oh, this happened while you were away. When did Rhaenyra fall for one of the Strongs? I don't even think she had a romantic spark with what's his name Strong there, So it just was a lot of things that didn't work. And we had to take time out of the progress we had been making to talk about those developments and why they happened that way. And it just felt like a case of telling, not showing. And again, I don't necessarily think we needed to have multiple seasons filling in that 10 years, but there just seemed like there was a jump or two too far for me to really feel as invested as I was before. Still, we get some cool dragon action. We got some Daemon and his wife, Laena, were flying around in really glorious fashion. That was pretty cool. Again, not in combat, Lainey, as I'm sure you would have liked, but it was still pretty cool, right? But, I just, at the end of the day, I'm thinking solid episode, but it really makes me wonder. This is the first time I've questioned the time jumps, where when we get to the end of the season, I'm going to be able to say, did these time jumps really make sense at the end of the day? Like, was it justified for us to make these leaps? This is the first time I've ever doubted that will be the case. All that said, though, Daniel, I want to turn to you on time jumps. What was your take on how they decided to jump ahead 10 years and sort of give us a soft reboot?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we talked about the time jumps in the before, and generally, I think that they all landed pretty well. Like, they didn't seem to be like the disconnect. I think that you and Lainey were talking about, I think, is really the key. And I even think as a standalone episode, it wasn't necessarily a bad episode. It's just like you mentioned, the context of this episode coming right after the last episode that we had, where it seemed like we were kind of hitting a little bit of a really getting in some the weeds, and really the conflict was starting to kind of come out, and then we jump, and the disconnect it really just didn't land for me. But that being said, like I said, on its own, there's some really cool things that happen in this episode. And if this were the pilot, I may feel differently about it, but it's not the pilot. It's in the very middle of the season, and we have all that other stuff that is part of our context and when we're watching this. And I still think that there's a lot of potential, but that's kind of where I think you guys kind of nailed it with the disconnect and that kind of stuff. So.
Killed the momentum a little bit. Lainey, I just want to hone in on your thoughts on the time jump. We've talked about the disconnect here. Have the time jumps been an issue for you this season, or was this the first time where you were like, ooh, a little too much?
This was the first time it was like, whoa, this is too much. I mean, you're relying on your audience to follow along and to kind of keep up, but don't make it hard for them. And I felt for this time they make it hard for them. I mean, even if they had just put, and maybe I missed it, on the screen 10 years later, but we jumped right into it, and you're like, who is this person? Oh, I guess that's Rhaenyra. Oh, I guess she's having a baby. Oh, all of those things. I thought it was just too much too fast, and then you're like, why the heck is she with this strong guy, the commander of the City Watch? When did that happen? I thought she and Laenor had an agreement that, they were going to make this commitment to one another and to fulfill their duty, but kind of live their separate lives. So that didn't surprise me so much, but not to supplant him as, the doing his duty when, she's got Strong to come in and do that now.
Yeah, that's probably the one that was the hardest for me to swallow, even more so than Daemon, who again I just thought was a complete 180 from where he was at. But Rhaenyra like has expressly said in previous episodes multiple times she doesn't want to have kids. Her mom died in childbirth. It's like the worst imaginable thing that could happen to her. And we jump ahead. Okay, we see her get married at the end of the last episode, and then we jump 10 years, and she's not just having number 1, number 2 kid, number 3 kid. And I'm like, there's a whole character arc right there. And I don't necessarily think we need to have a whole character arc or a whole season worth of story there. It was a little too jarring, and it really makes you think, these characters aren't who we left behind, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just feels like we're missing a lot of very important details. Yeah, go ahead.
I 100% agree. And the same thing about Daemon. It was like, oh, okay. Like you said, I thought he was going to be a player or be more involved or in scheming in some way, or at least being disruptive, because more than anything, he just loves to be disruptive and watch people's reactions. So the fact that he's just kind of sitting around, reading books and enjoying a life of leisure was, didn't fit.
Well, and it's funny, even Laena calls him on it. She's like, "You're not the dude I married. What's going on, man?" Yeah. Well, so it's very clear, I think, listeners, at least from our perspective, this time jump was a stretch too far, or 1 or 2 stretches too far. But let's go ahead and get into the sort of the nitty gritty of it here. So 10 years later, we open the episode with Rhaenyra giving birth to her 3rd child. Again, as we learn a few scenes later, apparently from the actual father being Sir Harwin Strong, who is the son of the Hand of the King, Lionel Strong, and the older brother of Laenor Strong, who is Larys Strong. Yeah. Larys Strong. A lot of L's, sorry. Larys Strong, who is the youngest brother who we see sort of pull the rug out from under us at the end of the episode. So just to kind of lay out that relationship and who this guy actually was, because I'm pretty sure he'd only appeared like in 1 or maybe 2 episodes previous with very few speaking lines. So we do actually get to see a fairly another graphic birthing scene. And I say graphic, really the part that's graphic is we see they have to cut the umbilical cord, which you see on screen, which is a detail that's frequently left out of birth in film and television. But also we see as she's like walking through the halls, she's still bleeding. It just kind of underscores like just what sort of a toll it takes on a woman's body to give birth and for how long. So all this said, the reason that she's walking around bleeding is because Queen Alicent demands to see the baby like the second the baby is born. And then Rhaenyra says, no. I'm going to take my baby to see her. Again, one thing about Rhaenyra that rings true is that she is not one to necessarily, I wouldn't say disrespect authority, but she is going to really overcome the obstacles put in her way to have it her way. And then when she arrives, Alicent is very surprised to see that Rhaenyra has come to bring her baby. And then we also see King Viserys, who's apparently somehow still alive, greeting them. So there's a lot of different things happening in this first little sequence I want to dive into. But the first one I want to talk about Lainey here is King Viserys. And the reason I want to start with this is because me and Daniel and our previous guest host spent a lot of time last week talking about how the hell is this guy still alive 10 years later, because the next time on kind of spoiled it. So Lainey, were you surprised to see Viserys still alive and kicking after 10 years of suffering from whatever form of sickness he has?
No, but yes. I think no, because I have some familiarity because of the books, but yes, because I was trying to remember. I was like, how long does he live? Because I can't, they're really stringing this out in the terms of TV time. But what I think they're waiting for is whatever happens at the moment he dies or shortly thereafter to be so dramatic that time jump obviously would not accommodate either. Because you need that immediate upheaval and chaos. And when everyone starts, as they're building up to the, Team Alicent, Team Rhaenyra is kind of what's going on in the buildup. So I am a little bit surprised. I don't know how much longer we're going to have him.
So yeah, that's my next question. We have been hedging our bets this season about how many episodes he has left. I missed it because I said he was going to die in episode 6. So Daniel, what was your bet again, Daniel? Remind me, how many episodes does this guy have?
I mean, when I watched the episode last week, before I watched the next time on, I thought like that was it. That was his death. Like I thought they ended the whole episode with his death. And obviously, once I watched the next time on, I saw him, and so that impact was lost a little bit for me. But I feel like stretched was the right word to use. Like I feel like they're really stretching out, or at least they made it seem like he could die at any time, and it's like, buddy, makes it 10 years. Like I don't know. And also in this episode, we didn't get a lot of that, like almost fainting, and we didn't see. If I recall, we didn't see any of his wounds like we'd been seeing in the last couple episodes. So that was also like part of the time jump was like, okay, so he was almost dying 10 years ago, but now he's good, almost. Like it's kind of how it felt to me. So my guess is he has to die soon. That seems like it's going to be a crucial turning point in this story. So I guess I'm going to go with the next episode, but I felt like he felt more alive in this episode than he did last episode. So that is weird.
He looks pretty sickly, but yes, like his scene to scene, he seemed to have more consistent energy levels than last week, where you're like, oh gosh, this guy's gonna go. Yeah, okay, well, so I mean, I think Lainey laid it out pretty nicely. I mean, he's gonna die, and it's gonna be the impetus for Rhaenyra and Alicent trying to go after each other for the claim. I mean, they even really outlined it in this episode more so than previous episodes when we see Alicent talking to her son about him being the threat. He is the one who is going to, object to who's heir to the throne. So, anyway, it's coming soon. It's a matter of when. And, in traditional television, I would say, oh yeah, the season finale, episode 10. But Game of Thrones actually made a big habit of making episode 9 the really big episode, at least in the earlier seasons of that show. So I'm really curious about when that's going to drop. When is the powder keg going to go off? It's only a matter of time. But I want to circle back to the Alicent Rhaenyra piece there. So, Lainey, what does this entire interaction between Alicent and Rhaenyra tell you about the status quo of their relationship over the last 10 years?
A little bit that it's indicative of society, where society often pits women against one another, and that is what's happened. They are two friends, or they were two friends. They were two very close friends, and the circumstances of their situations, they are now two strong women being pitted against one another. And of course, I blame Otto Hightower for this, because he's based on his own ambition, put his daughter in this position when Viserys's wife died, and then of course he's sad about it later. And I'm like, dude, you're the one that did it. You were like, hey, go see the king. But because of that, it's pitted these two women, intelligent women, and over the last 10 years. Alicent has come into her own as queen and has seized that power that she had only kind of poked at, whereas Rhaenyra was very self-assured in her power and in her position. And then now it's like their positions are reversed. And then I'm like, since when does Rhaenyra go running whenever Alicent calls? And so that surprised me a little bit in the episode. And then so that shows me that their relationship has gotten more contentious, more pitted one another, as Alicent has, let the banners of war fly as with the green dress, from the previous episode. So she's like, it's like a siege. They're laying siege against one another, it seems.
And it really does seem like they both know that the Viserys is going to keel over at any moment. It's just a matter of who's going to be positioned better. And I think they both, well, mostly Rhaenyra makes strides to mend the relationship in this episode, which we'll get to in a bit. Daniel, what did you make about this interaction? Anything stick out to you?
Yeah, I think that's a terrific summary. I think I didn't even fully consider the whole fact that like Otto puts her there, and that's like sort of the catalyst for the slowly deteriorating of their relationship. I mean, I'm just sad for both of them. I think that, when those first 2 episodes, I got the sense they have a really strong bond and they have a deep care and love for one another. So much so, like we had even talked about several times, like, is there potentially like a romantic relationship happening? But now that just
yes, there was subtext.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
I mean, yes, there was subtext.
Yeah, I think like, and that was really, it was, anytime you see like that level of connection between 2 characters, like that's exciting to see. And so to see them just be so disconnected at this point, it makes me feel, it's really sad. And I think that, like you mentioned, Caleb, I do think, Rhaenyra is more in this place of where she's maybe trying to salvage the relationship a little bit, but Alicent doesn't seem to have any desire to have a relationship with her anymore. And so that just sort of breaks my heart in a way, because I feel like they could have been such a powerful duo, but unfortunately, this is the patriarchy has forced them to be separated, and that's just really sad to see. So I mean, we talked about, not to have been too far ahead, but we talked about last episode how I was like, when Alicent came into the room and she was sort of like coming into her own and having a lot of more autonomy and not just seemingly at like the whim of her father or Viserys or whatever. But then it feels like it's because of this jump, she's almost so far the other way that I was like, wait a second, I was ready to be on your side, Alicent, but now you're so far the other way that I don't know if I am on your side anymore. And that just happened in an episode. So that's part of the disconnect, I think, that happens with the time jump as well.
I think the thing is, with hers, she has decided to lean into her family allegiances, as we saw with the green dress last episode. And so her storyline is probably the one that tracks the most for me in terms of like where she's at now versus where she was at before. With the side note of like, clearly the relationship there has deteriorated quite a bit. She's really turned into a bit of an ice queen, unfortunately, because there was like no one in this episode who I felt like really got through to her until the last scene of the episode, where you finally see a look of fear kind of on her face and discomfort. But like largely, she kind of held everyone at arm's length. The way she would talk, and the way she talked to people was pretty, no different than most of the powerful men in Westeros, frankly. But like, just the way she would engage with people in conversation was just much, much different. It was a lot more abrasive, very condescending in a lot of circumstances, specifically, mostly when she was talking about either Rhaenyra or Rhaenyra's children, which we'll get to here in a moment. But actually, speaking of Rhaenyra's children, 10 years have passed. I imagine probably one of the big reasons that we've gone this far is so that we could bring in the next generation of Targaryens here. And I'm just going to go down the line really quickly, and feel free to correct me if I speak out, because turns out, guys, it's really hard to look up family trees with accurate names without also accidentally spoiling yourself on the show. Just fun fact. So don't look up the family tree unless you want to accidentally find something. So Alicent's 3 kids that I have noted here are, we have Aegon, of course, the oldest. We'd seen him as a baby in previous episodes. We have Aemond, who is the middle child. And then we have Helaena, who is another, I want to say one of the younger of Alicent's kids, but still technically in the middle of the full pack. And then on Rhaenyra's side, we have Jacaerys Velaryon, and then we have Lucerys Velaryon. And then we have, in this episode, Joffrey Velaryon. So there are 6 on the board as I count them right now. There might be more that have not appeared on screen. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there if I missed one. So we are introduced to at least all the boys when they're in the dragon pit, and the three of the boys, that is Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Aegon. I guess Aemond is the kid who gets picked on amongst them. So it sounds like the kids have some sort of a bond and friendship there that they can kind of, play pranks on each other. But the 3 of them gang up against Aemond, who does not have a dragon. And instead of a dragon arriving out of the pit, there is a pig dragon. A pig that is dressed like a dragon that crawls out of the pit. This leads Aemond to make his way down into the pit later, only to get terrified by a full-size dragon. He then runs up to the keep and tells his mom, Alicent, what happens. And naturally, Alicent immediately blames all of the Velaryon children. And she was so upset about it that she confronts Viserys about the prank. in which case it gives her a great opportunity to talk about how she does not believe Rhaenyra's children are legitimate. So I would say this is a whole new batch of characters. I'm not sure quite yet how much screen time they're going to get, at least this season, but we know Aegon at least is a major player, whether he knows it or not, although this episode seems to imply that Alicent's given him the clue. But I would say one of the unique opportunities of jumping ahead 10 years, despite all the shortcomings we've already discussed, is that it does provide a chance for us to see how this family rivalry is actually being passed down to the next generation. Because again, it seems like all the kids get along for the most part. It's the parents who are fighting, but then their kids get kind of drawn into the middle of it. So I would love to just pick your brains on it, and I'll start with you, Lainey. What are sort of the consequences that we are seeing within the children of this family drama?
I do want to note here that Viserys thinks they're all getting along. He's clueless. He's absolutely clueless, because he says it in the episodes like, oh, look at them. They're all training together. This is going to form this bond. But as we can see, that doesn't come to fruition. One of the things that I really observed is since Rhaenyra is named heir to the Iron Throne, Aegon really considers himself to have no responsibility, and no one really has invested, it seems, the time in teaching him how to be like a decent person, or at least a halfway decent ruler in statecraft and behavior. I mean, literally one of our first introductions, he's in this window, giving a gift to Westeros, I guess you could say. I was like, that's awkward. And because then his mom comes in, right? So that shows that he has no boundaries. He hasn't been given any, because he hasn't had to have any responsibility. And now you've taken this spoiled child essentially, and you're saying, okay, now you're going to get, if you fight for it, you're going to get to be king, and therefore he's going to see that to do what you want. And because unfortunately for these kids, the political implications of their existence is going to be, it's about power, and they're unfortunately going to be unable to avoid that, because for them it's life or death. It's not just getting exiled. It's like, in order to secure her throne, Rhaenyra may have to kill them, and that's the axe that Alicent feels looming over their heads, thanks to her father. So the consequences is that Aegon hasn't been brought up with any of this structure as heir. And how is that going to play into it and everything? So, I think that's, and the other boys are just young enough that they just, they feel the rivalry, because Jacaerys, he's able to figure out that Harwin Strong is his father. He's perceptive of that, and what that means if he's a bastard.
Yeah, he seems a little mortified in that sequence, but I want to hone in on something that you said there about Aegon having no boundaries and no sense of responsibility, and then all of a sudden his mom's like, you've got to fight for it. This is yours. Take it, sort of thing. We'll see where it goes, but that's some really strong Joffrey Baratheon vibes there. I got a lot of echoes of there was a scene specifically in season 1 of Game of Thrones where Cersei meets with Joffrey privately and tells him that when he's king, whatever he can imagine will be real. Now, Alicent, not quite that evil, not quite feeding his fantasies in that way, but she's sort of implying a similar principle, which is this could be yours. You've got to fight for it. You've got to work for it. Whereas he initially, when she's talking to him, he's like, what do you want? I'm not even the heir. I don't care. And she's like, no, but you will be. Sort of planting those seeds in his head. Daniel, any thoughts specifically about like sort of how these family rivalries sort of pass down to the next generation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we specifically, like you're saying, Alicent, I even thinks is like, basically says if she becomes in control of the throne, like she'll kill you, and she's saying this to her child. You know what I mean? So I think like it's direct, at least from Alicent's side, it's pretty direct that this is a life or death situation that we're in. But I also will just say really quickly, I couldn't help it when I saw this scene that I had to immediately think of what I believe was the last time we saw that particular window with Tommen. I don't know why I was immediately brought back to that, but that was interesting that we that was the framing of this scene. We haven't seen a ton, in this one episode of Rhaenyra and her, specifically talking to her children. So it'd be interesting to see how she has been talking to them. But I think, we're seeing from Alicent is she is very clear, has a very clear agenda on and what is supposed to happen, and is in some ways even instilling like a sense of fear that like we have to do something or like these really terrible things will happen. That's going to be on their minds as they continue to have these interactions with all the other kids.
Daniel, you just pointed out something that I hadn't considered, which is sort of when you compare and contrast the relationship these mothers have with their families. The thing that the sort of the strengths and weaknesses of both is Alicent can be pretty direct and honest with her kids about what she wants, whereas Laena, you pointed out a moment ago, I mean, her kids don't even know, like Rhaenyra's kids don't even know that their dad's not their dad officially. So like that's got to foster some sort of like mistrust or uncertainty amongst her family. Again, we'll see how and if that plays out in future episodes. But in some ways it does, I would say, position Unity in a stronger front for the Hightower family because, she can be really honest. Hey, here's what's at stake. And is she wrong? I mean, we know this is Westeros. If things got bad, she's not wrong because she's also sort of being very combative. When Rhaenyra tries to make good, she dismisses it. But still, like if things were to go south, she knows that it would lead to, warfare between the families. So anyway, I don't know. I guess her ability to be honest and direct, I think, is a huge strength that she has that Rhaenyra does not. In this case,
which is in contrast to Rhaenyra in the first part of the season, who was very direct and to the point. It's like and about what she liked, what she didn't like, what she wanted to do, what she didn't want to do. Like the thing with Daemon and going to diffuse that situation at Dragonstone, she didn't ask it for anyone's permission. She just went and did it, and now we've kind of got that flip again where Alicent is the one who's really kind of seized the power, and embraced it and is using it to the best of her ability, with the limitations with Viserys being around. And she flat out tells him, you can do what you want over my cold dead body. And that's, she's kind of laid it down that you don't get to make all the decisions. This is the episode where you have really seen her step into her power. And she's not letting go.
Oh, no, this is just the beginning. Speaking of power and switching of sides, let's talk about Sir Criston Cole, who has 180'd his allegiances. So Criston Cole, who in the last week's episode pledged his love to Rhaenyra, so much so that he was willing to abandon his post. They could run away together, have this beautiful life outside of the politics of Westeros, and she shuts him down. And now he is flipped 180'd after he murdered Joffrey and apparently reached his lowest level. And I guess whatever Alicent said to him persuaded him to come on board the Hightower train. So question for you guys. I have a lot to unpack here, honestly, about this character, but I want to start with you, Lainey. Did you buy this the switch from Sir Criston?
Yes, I guess. Because I was like, really? Is his ego that fragile? And Caleb and I were talking about earlier. I was like, yeah, I got two words for that. Male fragility. When it comes to the ego, it's like he couldn't accept that Rhaenyra would not sacrifice her ambition, her power, and position to live penniless with him in Pentos or Essos or some other place that she had ambition of her own. She might complain about that she's forced to do things that she doesn't want to do. What teenager doesn't? But that he was just basically so butthurt about that. He killed somebody and then switched the other side. I was like, really? That's my thought on that.
I just have to stop and say, I know Queen Alicent is the queen and what she says is the law, I guess. But he straight up murdered a dude in the open with dozens of witnesses. He murdered a guy in cold blood. I mean, I guess they just decided to let that one go, and now he gets to defend the queen. I'm at a loss.
I don't get it either.
Daniel, what were you thinking?
You say male fragility. I was thinking incel. That's what I was thinking when I was watching this. Just like that was the huge energy I got from him.
Daniel, that incel behavior is underlined on my notes, but I'm glad you said it, not me.
The way that he just talks about her to Alicent, I'm just like, what is wrong with you? Like, just because she like stuck to her plan and like just committed to her family, like you're like gonna like, I don't know. So that was the energy I was getting from him. It was inside. It was really, and like you said, Caleb, I was like, this is again part of the. I mean, Criston Cole's not the biggest main character that we're looking for, but like that was like a jarring for me, like and the way that he just seemingly had no consequences for his actions. And I know I can't remember exactly who it was, but when we had the Red Six podcast on, one of them had talked about how this is just Viserys' reign. Like things happen and stuff happens, and no, there are no consequences because he is so conflict averse that has, in a sense, like trickled down to everyone. Where like people can just get away with whatever they want, and because he doesn't want to deal with it, they just get away with it. So I think that's just sort of a part of Viserys' issue. But yeah, I was, we came off last episode talking about how Criston Cole may be one of the most like out until his incident where he murders someone was like such like honor was so important to him. He believed in it and was supposed to be this great. I think someone even said perhaps up until that point was one of the more honorable people we've actually seen on Game of Thrones. And then just the way the last episode ends and the way that this one starts, it's like, no, absolutely not. That is thrown out the window.
This is okay. You use the word incel. I'm just going to throw out some other internet reference here. Are you guys familiar with Gamergate? It was about a decade ago, I guess now at this point. Yeah. So this is the Gamergate. He's mad that his girlfriend or his one night stand went and said, no, that was fun, but no thanks. And went and slept with some other dude. And he's like, oh, well, you know what? You're the worst. And then he says a lot of nasty stuff about her. And I'm sure he's also out there like peddling all these rumors out to the masses in order to try to just ruin her name, all because she didn't want to date him. It just is terrible. It reeks. And it is funny though, Daniel, because I think it was you and I were both like, yeah, up until the point he murders the dude seems like a pretty, decent guy. Nope.
Well, and let's be honest, Mr. Honorable really didn't, brush off Rhaenyra's advances with much enthusiasm. He was like, oh, and let's talk about, have a conversation about consent. He says no, but then, and this is just one of those times that that's a fantasy. That's a fantasy where he just couldn't help himself when, he gets, really upset that, I've soiled my white cloak, and all of these things. And I'm like, well, you could have told her no. And then he gets just so angry that he thinks that she wants him to play, as he said, her whore. And maybe to an extent that's true because she's, pretty self-indulged herself with the power that's going to be coming to her. But I thought his reaction to all of that was just, it was gross. It was over the top. And I'm like, I was trying to rack my brain, like, did this happen in the book? And to be honest with you, I can't remember.
As far as I've read the book, it's sort of like comments on general historical events without getting really into the weeds about like some of the smaller, more minute details. I haven't gotten that far yet, so I don't know. But I would not be surprised if it wasn't in the book. So yeah, Sir Criston, we 180'd over the last 2 episodes. Actually, skeezy guy. Surprise! Everyone in Westeros is at least varying degrees of evil or gross. But here we go.
Poor character and intentional character or lack of character development there, or poor writing of that character to get to that jump, to do that 180.
I mean, I think it ties into what we were saying earlier, right? This time jump really has a lot of characters doing things that it's not that I don't believe that they made that jump. It's that there's definitely a lot of blanks in between here and there that make me feel like I have questions that I want to know the answer to, that I'm pretty convinced we're never going to get the answer to on any of these characters. You might get like one line of dialogue here or there, but I just don't think we're going to have the same satisfaction we got from the slow character arcs we saw in Game of Thrones, or even like the pace we were at earlier in the season when it's like, yeah, we jumped ahead a little bit, but the characters were generally still wrestling with the questions that were asked in the previous episode, or having to deal with the conflicts in some way, versus this, it's like, nope, we jumped so far ahead, it's new conflicts, it's new problems, it's new character arcs. So again, I guess we'll find out when the season's over whether it was worth it or not, but I would argue, yeah, it's a writing choice that I just don't agree with, honestly. Daniel, did you have something you wanted to say to that?
I mean, yeah, I think I could believe, that like if there was multiple instances over the last 10 years where they try to like figure out the relation, but they just like, and then Rhaenyra like really starts like just telling them like, no, blah, like, I don't like, there could have been some conflict, I guess, that was written to get to this point, but because it's that one moment where he said like they, sleep together once, and then he like professes his, as far as we see, and then he professes his undying love for her, and they want to run away together, and she doesn't even she's not even like rejects him in like a rude way. She's like, like, I have a duty or I have a responsibility. I want to be, the queen. Like, so no, I'm not going to run away with you. I'm still interested in potentially having a relationship with you, though. And he's like, no, I've lost everything, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's it. There's just the one moment. Like, if there was like multiple moments of them trying to like figure stuff out, and it continues, like, and Rhaenyra treated him poorly and some of it, she doesn't treat him poorly at all. So I think that for that reason, the jump makes it difficult to have any sort of empathy or sympathy for his character at all, because writing could. So I think that, yeah, it's probably a little bit of a writing like choice that doesn't completely land because of the time situation.
Fair question, Lainey. I think that's a good one. I'm going to talk a little bit about the scene, and we're going to come back to it here in a moment. But seeing Sir Criston in action, so he uses his position to train all of the Targaryen boys, which also includes the Velaryon boys as well. But he is clearly favoring the Targaryens because he serves Alicent. And after calling Criston out, Sir Harwin Strong gets in the confrontation with Cole, and then once he strikes him after being kind of goaded into a fake argument, Strong unintentionally fuels the rumors about the true heritage of the Velaryons. So we next see that Lionel Strong, who is the Hand of the King, confronts Harwin about it, and then strips him of his title and sends him back to Harrenhal. So I just want to pause here for a second and just underscore the powers of rumor. The rumors carry a lot of weight, and so much so that the Hand of the King is willing to strip his son of titles and banish him from King's Landing before he resigns himself, just so that he can distance himself from, how these rumors could cause, war or conflict amongst, the Velaryon house and the Targaryen house. Did you guys, I guess this might be a good time at any to talk about Harwin Strong. Did you guys have any particular thoughts on the Queen's new side piece, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just a little like, don't have any strong opinions on it. Just a little, wasn't expecting that. I mean, maybe it's been 10 years, I guess, but we had, as far as I remember, like we have like one line from him at their wedding in the last episode. I don't remember ever seeing him before that, so don't really know him that well, and he's already gone. So yeah, not a super strong opinion on him just because we haven't really seen him, unfortunately.
Well, I have a question, and Lainey, I'm actually going to throw this to you. I want to get your take on Harwin, but also I have to know, I guess Rhaenyra just goes for these guys because they're the knights, and I'm sure everyone like just really wants them. Is like what is the appeal of Sir Harwin Strong, and what do you think about how he's utilized in this episode?
I have no idea because I don't know who he is. I'm like, I was asking myself those same questions. It's like, who is this guy? And then, I mean, of course I know, because now, disclaimer, it was 3 years ago when I read the books. But I was like, I don't understand the connection, or how. I was just like, we don't even know who this is. Do they just have an affection for one another? Are they actually in love with one? I mean, because there are three kids, not just one. I almost would have expected Rhaenyra to have like 3 baby daddies, because more than anything, the power of that choice was so important to her that she'd be able to do kind of what she wanted. And it just seemed like a relationship of convenience rather than a choice of power in that sense, especially if Laenor wasn't going to fulfill his part of the bargain. So like, I don't have any ironically, strong opinions about Harwin Strong, because there's not enough to know about him. It's just like he was the side piece that was, and then isn't anymore, and that's about it.
Not the strongest character development, you could say.
I did start to get some, I mean, not strong, but stronger feelings about Lionel Strong.
Daniel, take a shot every time we say strong as a pun. No, I just want to echo what Lainey said. We don't really know him. Like, that's the thing. And then Lainey, I know you've read the books, but like that doesn't count. Like, they have not put in any time for us to give 2 shits about this guy. He's just some pretty face who showed up. But the thing is, like, he's a pretty face, but he's the father of 3 of Rhaenyra's kids. That latter part seems pretty important. So it just feels kind of weird that we gave him such a short shrift. But, hey, the plot must go on, I guess.
Because Rhaenyra's had all these, like, really dynamic men, in her life. There was Daemon, and that, of course, flirting with the Targaryen way, right? And then there was Sir Criston Cole, and then like, here's this guy. He's totally boring. He's just like, he seems like the most boring, probably steadfast character, just has an affection, but they have an agreement, which is very obvious. He knows where his place is. And she has sympathy for that, I think. But because obviously, he's hovering and all the time and around, and which probably has gone to fuel those rumors as much as anything, right? Is because he's always around. And so it's really, as Lionel says, people have eyes, they can see the resemblance. And we've seen that play out in Game of Thrones, it was a major component of that entire show.
Yeah, no, it was really funny, before the episode aired, once I realized that Rhaenyra was giving birth, and Alicent had summoned the baby immediately, I was like, oh, it's because she wants to check the hair color. I guarantee you that's what it is. Again, just as a nice remix of what we saw in Game of Thrones, so to speak. But again, Lainey, like you said, history repeats itself, and especially when heritage is and bloodline is such an important part of what defines power in Westeros. It was an interesting way to present the same story element in a new way. And man, now I just can't stop thinking of a Criston Cole going around town, just like spreading all these rumors, like it's like Twitter or something like that, sitting at the Ravens. Okay, so I want to shift gears here. We're going to come back to King's Landing, but before we get to what I would consider the more climactic element of the episode, we need to check in on Daemon, who Lainey mentioned a moment ago. So again, as I said earlier, much to my surprise, despite seeming to have political momentum for his ambitions last episode after he murdered his former wife and taking her lands, Daemon has decided to marry his flirt from the last episode, Laena Velaryon, and they now have 2 daughters with a third on the way. Daemon has forfeit all political ambitions in Westeros, and he's decided to go ahead and cash in on his name in Pentos, which, if you get that kind of celebrity of name, but you have no real political power, why not cash in on it? That's exactly what the royal family's done for hundreds of years, so why not? I just want to stop and talk about Daemon for a minute because, and this might just be me, I don't want to project what I wanted Daemon to be. Last episode, I was really vibing with where they were taking his character. Lainey, you said it really well earlier in the episode. I don't know if he's much of a schemer as much as he is a disruptor. That's the perfect way to put it, because every time he does something, I feel like there's a calculation as to why he's doing it. But so far, he's done a bunch of random things that haven't connected into any sort of meaningful plan as much of it as they've just really pissed a lot of people off or sort of shooken things up, even if people don't know it's Daemon who's the problem. So I think this move to Pentos seems like a pretty dramatic pivot away from where we last saw him. So Daniel, I'm going to start with you on this. What does this shift tell you about his new priorities?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he's these last 10 years, he's just dropped any sort of ambition or hope to become the heir. We started off the very first episode, he believed that he was going to be the heir, and by this point, it doesn't seem like he's even in the game anymore. It's down to Rhaenyra or Alicent's son Aegon. That seems to be the battle that's coming. So it feels like he felt like either whatever plan he may have had didn't plan out, and so he has sort of accepted his fate and is going to try to enjoy his life or something. I don't know. Like it's like I agree with you. It is a little, it's seeming like he kept coming back. He kept having a plan. He kept putting himself in front of people, and we even talked about how he has been able to make the perception. There was that, I think, what was that, episode 4, where we talked a lot about Daemon is acutely aware of the people's perception. So that seemed like a really strong position that he had, but he seems to just have, left that behind. We're not exactly sure why. Hopefully, maybe we'll get more of that in the next couple episodes.
Yeah, Lainey, what did you make of this pivot for Daemon's character?
A lot of along the lines of what Daniel said. It just seems like, you're wanting to know, what made him, even if he couldn't sit on the Iron Throne, what made him want to leave? It's because he very obviously wanted Rhaenyra, and I mean, so he went so far as to murder his wife, to try to, and with the other things of going out into Flea Bottom and wherever it is that they went to try to force Viserys's hand to make that happen, which at least was how I interpreted. It was a ploy. It was a scheme to basically be allowed to marry Rhaenyra. And he didn't. It's like, well, that didn't work, and that didn't work, and now there's Aegon. Well, it's almost like he's thrown his hands up. But it's still surprising because we would think he would want to be a player. It's like, and he gets distracted, or and falls in love with Laena, and they seem to have a happy relationship. He's met someone who's more along the lines of a match, so maybe he's found some contentment, which has made him more lax. But now that she's gone, what's going to happen? And I know we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing about him is, as Laena points out, he's not a very good father. Like, his kids don't feel love from him, but I do think he clearly has affection for Laena, right? They have again that really awesome sequence where they're, I don't know, playing chicken with their dragons, flying around, trying to outdo one another, and it really does, as you point out, Lainey, signal some really strong chemistry. The scenes they had between each other, though there were a few of them, they were very strong. I think. And that was probably the one relationship that we had zero context, almost zero context for coming off of last episode, that I thought they did a good job selling this episode. But alas, we see this really just sad death of Laena, where, essentially Daemon is faced with the same challenge or difficult decision, is probably the better way to put it, regarding Laena's fate that Viserys was in the first episode, which is in the patriarchal system. The doctors come to him and say, what do we do? And the thing I love about this is, and also, Laine, to your point, signaling that she is a much stronger match for Daemon. She doesn't let them decide. She decides on her own. She's like, I know what's coming. I'm going to go die the way I want to go out, which is as a dragon warrior, so death by dragon instead of death in bed or with dead baby, So again, this complication is very tragic, and I think they've certainly done their work underscoring how awful it is to be a woman in patriarchal society, especially Westeros. Lainey, from your perspective, what is the significance of Laena taking matters into her own hands here?
It's the power of choice. And when that's taken away from women, what often happens to them, but she, seizes that choice. She snatches it back away from the maester and or whoever that guy was. And Daemon says, no, this is my choice. And it's of course not the choice anybody that she probably even wanted to make. The situation without proper health care and things like that. Those were the things that happened 200, 350 years ago, and things that happen now all across the world without proper medical care and those resources, is that she's left with this impossible choice, and she goes out on her own terms. She takes the power of that choice, and it makes a very strong message and point when she does so. It's like she's living and dying on her own terms, which is not something a lot of women anywhere get to do. And so I loved that scene. I was like, she's begging her dragon, who doesn't want to do it, and finally sees and senses how much pain and agony that she's in, and that how much she wants this because it's her choice. And her power, and she's seizing her power. That's what I loved about that scene so much. It was devastating. It was heartbreaking because I thought, this is a pretty kick-ass character. She is badass. I like her. She's riding on the back of a dragon when she's, 9 months pregnant. I like her, and I want to see more of her. And so now I'm mad that I don't get to see more of her. And I just hope, her daughters sees that example and who she was, and embrace that in themselves.
Well, the good news is, as we said before we started recording, there's Game of Thrones forever because of how successful House of the Dragon's been. So maybe we get a spinoff. Who knows? Who knows if we're lucky? Daniel, what was your take on how Laena decided to go out here?
Yeah, I think that sums it up perfectly. I think, obviously this is, back at the beginning of in the first episode, we have a very similar situation. And so in here, we see, her, like Laena said, choosing, having the choice. Whereas back at the beginning of the episode, that was not the case. There was no choice that was allowed to be given. Her being able to own that choice, but I think Laena summed it up really well. I don't think there's anything else I can add to that.
Laena, I want to throw a follow-up question up at you here. I mean, when we're thinking about childbirth, and you mentioned earlier about how the show has prominently featured that in a way that Game of Thrones certainly never did. What has been your take on not just they're showing childbirth, but they've shown it in various ways? We see a death in the first episode. We see childbirth earlier at the beginning of this episode. And then we see a second childbirth death that leads to a dead mother in this episode. So, I mean, what is your take on how House of the Dragon has presented childbirth to the screen? Do you think they're making a really good use of it? Do you think this is sort of raising awareness for, hey, this is really hard? Or does it seem like maybe a little more brutal towards our women characters?
Sadly, it's very realistic. When Emma has, they essentially perform a C-section, but they have no way to stop blood loss. I mean, that was the choice. And it was, now, of course, Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon is not a real timeline of our history, but let's say you put it in the equivalent timeline, there was no way to stop the bleeding. That, it was, and I would say, it was an impossible choice because it's lose one or both, and it's heartbreaking. That's why, Viserys is, appropriately devastated that this choice has fallen to him, and the terror of his wife when it happens, right? Because he wants a son, though, more than anything. And that even cost him, right? And then even when jump to Rhaenyra and her birth, the afterbirth, that's a thing that really happens. Woman gives birth, but then you have the placenta and all of the things, the afterbirth, that still has to come out. And that is a very real thing. So when she's walking along, her body is still laboring and exhausted from those things. So the fact that Alicent was like, I want to see the baby, and then it's this power move, and it was a very dick move of Alicent to do that. It all of it is painfully realistic because as someone who has been pregnant, who had a C-section, it was devastating and physically traumatic to go through all that. And I had a C-section, and it took me a long time to recover physically from that. So all of that is I appreciate Game of Thrones not pulling any punches on how they've portrayed those scenes. I know some people are like, that's extreme. I'm like, it's really not. It's really not. Ask anyone who's given birth, and without medication and has done everything natural about it is a traumatic experience that a woman's body goes through. And they've shown that very accurately, and the devastation without, it shows us the reality of those times, or what would have been those times if, imagine what women, in the 1600s went through. That's why pregnancy was seen as a potential death sentence, because that's exactly what could happen.
I think the thing that House of the Dragon has sparked a lot of conversation, and me and Daniel have tried to talk delicately about this subject through the season, as we are two men who have never given birth, nor will we. So don't want to speak out of ignorance on our end, but I appreciate you sharing that, because I have wondered a little bit. There's part of me that's wondered if the visceral reaction we've gotten, I wouldn't say it's the majority. I think most people are kind of on board with what they're putting out there in terms of, oh, this is really awful, but this is Game of Thrones portraying, a Dark Ages birth, essentially. Like, what was it like? What was the world like for when then? But I think the thing that stuck out to me is it underscoring that we haven't really done a good job putting childbirth on the screen to sort of underscore just how hard and painful it is. I'm not saying every childbirth scene in every movie needs to be like really intense like we're seeing here, but I just don't know that I've seen a show commit to it as consistently as House of the Dragon. And I'm wondering if that sort of the reality of it, as you described, is a little overwhelming to people. Because they haven't been exposed to it before. I don't know. Go ahead, Lainey.
Keep in mind. I mean, no, I think it is an intentional choice, because keep in mind that the past portrayals in popular history is that a stork delivered a baby, and a lady went to the hospital, but then a stork delivered the baby. And there was no trauma, and it was big happy times. I mean, even the Bible. You go back to Genesis, and it talks about how for the original sin, Eve's, labors were going to be made to be harder and stuff like that. So, and because it is hard, I mean, you're growing a person, you're making a person. Women recover from that, and kind of go on and believe it or not, we do it again, and happily do so in many situations. I know some women who love being pregnant, and some women who don't love it, but love their children and continue on. So, but is it, I think it's definitely accurate for what would have been the comparable time period, for sure.
Thanks so much for weighing in there. I've really been wanting to get your take on the subject, but let's move on to the power of the rumor mill. So circling back, we've heard the whispers, we've seen the scenes where the Larys Strong punched Sir Criston Cole in the face, and then Sir Criston Cole took to Twitter and sent the ravens out all over Westeros. So Rhaenyra confronts Lenore about the rumors swirling. So Lenore being her actual married husband. And you know what's funny about this? He doesn't seem worried at all. He's really just like, you know what? Yeah. Politics. You know what's cool though? We might go to war again soon, and I get to go ride my dragon and kill some stuff. That's what he seems so worried about for the most part. So in an attempt to squash the increasing tension, so Rhaenyra hears the conversation that Larys Strong has with his son, and she can just see Alicent pressing so hard to get her pushed out. She makes the decision to propose that the two families combine into one. So Rhaenyra offers to wed her son to Alicent's daughter, and then also, as a little cherry on top, offers a dragon egg along with the marriage as a sign of strength in the Targaryen household. And I thought it was notable she does this in front of the entire small council so that everyone can see that she at least attempted to make good. And even Viserys, who again, as she pointed out, Lainey, is completely clueless, is like, Great gesture. Teamwork makes the dream work. This is great. That dragon egg? Yes, that's perfect. Let's do it. So I have to ask, Lainey, I'll start with you on this. What do you make of this move on Rhaenyra's part?
Too little, too late. I think if she had made this gesture the second her son was born and Helena was born, or however that would have played out, it would have made sense, and that it could have possibly mended the rift between Alicent and Rhaenyra and their families, and given everyone kind of a sense of security, by tying their families that way. But then, of course, then we wouldn't have all the drama that we're going to have if she had been smart about it. But too little, too late is my take.
Daniel, any thoughts here?
Piggybacking off that, it was felt desperate, like they're all getting up, they're all leaving, and then she's like, this will work. It's like a last ditch effort to try to potentially save something. And like Lanny said, it's just too little too late. Doesn't even seem fully sincere, in the way that it comes across either. It's just so weird because like we've mentioned a couple times, Rhaenyra is felt like very like strong and direct and powerful, and it seems and now after this into this episode, it seems to be much less of her character at this point, and it has switched to Alicent. This is the reverse, the swap that they have had.
Yeah, desperate is one way to put it. And here's the thing, Alicent doesn't even value the proposal even as a proposal because she doesn't look at Rhaenyra's kids as legitimate. The way she talks about Rhaenyra's kids is just ouch. She's like, those odd kids or what, it's just so condescending, frankly. Now, again, mostly that condescension is about Rhaenyra, not about the kids, but it's redirected. It just feels kind of icky. But yeah, she doesn't buy it for a second. And I think if Rhaenyra, I can't believe Rhaenyra actually tried that at this stage in the game. But hey, desperate times, desperate measures, I guess. So let's talk a little bit about Larys Strong, who then approaches the king after that small council meeting to resign his position. As I noted earlier, he wants to be as far away. He can see the drama coming like a freight train. He's like, I got to get out of here because this stuff's going to hit the fan and I don't want to be a target, essentially. It was kind of my take on this thing. Viserys demands an explanation for why he would resign. He's been, as we even noted earlier, such a great, loyal and fairly objective hand that does not appear to be self-serving as far as we can tell. But Lionel refuses to be direct. He just continues to say, I can't say. I won't say. There's a dark cloud over my family, being very cryptic. And the outcome is the king does not accept the resignation, which is, I think that's always funny when people don't accept resignations. It's like, the guy can still leave, right? And Lionel agrees to stay in his position if he can first go home to Harrenhal to escort his son back. So I just have to ask you guys, Viserys is just continuing to bury his head further and further into the sand to ignore the rumors about Rhaenyra. At this point, Daniel, I'll start with you here. Why does he continue to deny the truth even when it is directly in front? Like the truth is right there, right in front of his eyes. Everyone's saying it. His wife's saying it. Like, what is it about this guy that allows him or enables him to just look away?
Yeah, we've touched on it before. He is just so conflict averse. Like, he just does not want to deal with it. Doesn't seem equipped really to deal with it. And so he would rather just, pretend it's not there because it makes his life more convenient and it's easier for him. I feel like that's really his character at this point. We've had like one or maybe twice where he has been sort of like, strong and been able to make a decision in the midst of difficult situation or conflict or whatever. But if it were his way, he would just go chill on like a beach somewhere and just pretend like the problems don't exist. That's basically been his approach. And that's why we have all these problems rising, is because they've never been dealt with. And so, like, I think you used the word powder keg, just like it's just the fuse is getting shorter and shorter. And even if he were to do something at this point, it's too late. Everything's sort of been set in motion. The second that he dies, it's chaos. The ladder will emerge.
Lainey, what's your thought on Viserys here? How does he continue to have this superpower to ignore very big problems that are directly in front of him?
He's sentimental. I believe he truly, loves Rhaenyra, and he's, loves Alicent and, all of their children, but he's blind to their faults and their weaknesses, as he's probably blind to some of his own. He's trying to, by not confronting some things, he's created problems that he never wanted, because he didn't want to have a conflict, or an open conflict, because he was very steadfast when he named Rhaenyra his heir, and he's thinking that should be done. He just never imagined he would also have to continue to fight for it. And he's just sentimental, and therefore just refusing to acknowledge the problem, for whatever reason, because acknowledging that it exists is probably very painful, because, even if they're, bastards, the Valerians, they're still his grandsons, right? And, Aegon and Aemond and Helena are still his children. And so it has to be painful. So I think instead of dealing with it and the political fallout of it, he's dealing it essentially with this, like this grandfather, this indulgent grandfather. He's like, I'm just going to let them figure it out, which is going to be, as we know, leading up to some sort of devastation.
There are two different things that tell you all you need to know about how Viserys handles conflict. The first one I'm going to bring up is actually from this episode, which is Alicent just is, again, very direct, tells him, but these are not legitimate Valerian kids. Look at their hair color. She spells it out. And he says, let me tell you a story about one time I found this horse. And which, by the way, I didn't even think the story totally made sense. Honestly, it definitely sounded like an old grandfather rambling on, and only loosely related to the point he was trying to make. So I think that comparison, Lainey, is very apt. But the other one I want to call out is going back to that very first episode. He has infection spots on his back, and the Ministers are very worried about it. And he's like, it's just a pinprick. But I think that his slow decay that we've seen throughout the series, it is just really great sort of like imagery for sort of the health of the kingdom and of the family. He just continues to push it off and maybe treat the symptoms, but not really get to the root of the issue. And because of that, he is seeing just tremendous decay amongst his family. The health of the kingdom is in question at this point. So again, I think those two scenes really tell you all you need to know about how he handles conflict or doesn't. We move on here because as soon as Alicent wraps up her direct conversation here, she decides to go meet with Larys Strong. Now, Larys, who we saw last week's episode, Daniel, you and I and the others talked about, this guy seems like he might be a schemer because he's just very strategically dropping some information that might be helpful to Alicent. And Larys here, I guess, who Alicent meets semi-regularly for dinner, but I guess in secret or maybe in secret, it's a little unclear. He suggests that his father cannot remain impartial in advising the king, to which Alicent agrees. Now, this is where it starts to get really interesting. Larys decides he says, the queen doesn't think my father can be partial. So he takes this. He apparently goes down to the dungeons, recruits a bunch of death row prisoners, and he recruits them to go start a fire at Harrenhal that ends up killing both Lionel and Harwin. And in the final scene of the episode, we see that he's using it to blackmail Queen Alicent, or that was my takeaway, was that he was blackmailing her because she said, I never told you to do that. And he's like, but you did, you wished it. And I achieved it for you. And I know that one day you will reward me greatly. It just very sleazy, kind of taking what she said out of context, applying meaning to it, and then coming back saying, see, you told me to do this. So, again, Larys has sort of crept out of the darkness to reveal himself as one of the first season of the House of the Dragon's real shadow players. And I'm saying shadow players, think of Game of Thrones. We mentioned Littlefinger, Peter Baelish earlier, but you also have Varys. You could also argue to a certain degree, Tywin Lannister, in certain cases, especially like season 1 and season 2, is a shadow player to some extent. So how does this move by Larys to kill both his father and his brother further propel him into a powerful position. Lainey?
Okay, first, can we say sociopath? I think that's where Alicent realizes that, oh my gosh, I've been confiding into someone who is no compunction into murdering his father and his brother in order to advance himself or me. It's like, I think this is where she's woken up to who he is, and it is terrifying. The second thing, Varys rhymes, Shadow Player. I was like, oh, wait, hey, that rhymes. Their names are very similar. I just, he is going to be one of those. And, you knew kind of, as he kind of suddenly started popping up with this information that he was going to be some sort of, I think in the post show notes, they called him a villain. It's like, we introduced our first villain. I was like, oh, well, that's really framing it for the audience. He's a villain. He's a bad guy. Or is he really loyal? They don't even leave it up for question. Like, okay, we're going to introduce our first villain, which, I think you let the audience figure that out, even if that's what they figure out, because a lot of people were rooting for Peter Baelish. I mean, I know somebody on this podcast that loved Peter Baelish more than anyone. And I was,
I'm looking at him in the eyes right now. He's watching over me, fueling my ambitions. No, just joking.
So that's where I kind of see the thing with Alicent is in Larys and that whole situation. He's power hungry. He has an agenda. He had no issues in killing off his family in order to benefit her, but it also benefits him. He's now the Lord of Harrenhal. He's got his own, maybe he's the first one to try to create chaos in order to climb the ladder.
I absolutely think he's the first one to do that because before, we talked all about Otto Hightower earlier in the season and how he was quietly making very strategic moves that were very beneficial to him and his family. This is the first time where I feel like this guy is straight up murdering mofos in order to really weaken the claims to the throne so that he can escalate, can sort of raise himself up as a person who could be useful to people like Alicent, right? And this is where I was like, all right, Game of Thrones. Now we're finally cooking. So, Daniel, what did you think about Larys and sort of what the fires he started? What could that mean for him in the long run?
He's definitely like a brutal guy. Like we seemingly were introduced to him in the last episode, and we were kind of like, okay, this guy might be like, a tricky guy. We kind of want to keep our eye out for him. And then boom, he's like in your face, like making probably like, like you said, Caleb, we were talking about like the subtlety of the moves that were being made. He is not being subtle, like even though not everyone knows that, it was him or whatever, he is making like looking for big, massive plays, not small incremental plays. And very brutal in the way that he was willing to do that. I mean, killing his own family, the way that he was like cutting out tongues, like it was just like, gosh, this guy is not a guy you want to be aligned with, Alicent. You made a mistake. So for me, I think my read was that he's trying to become the Hand. That's like his play. Getting in Alicent's, maybe he can rely on Alicent to potentially put in a good word, same family, he's a guy that you can trust just like you could trust him. I don't know. That's the most immediate move that I can see that he's potentially trying to make as a way to move upwards. But obviously, like his long-term plan is probably much grander than that. So he's one of these characters that'll be like, I'll be excited to see what he's doing, but also be devastated probably by most of the moves that he's going to make.
I was going to say, if time travel were a thing, I think Larys is who would be the love child of Ramsay Bolton and Peter Baelish.
It's true. He has the cruelty of Ramsay Bolton, but apparently sort of the conniving smoothness of Peter Baelish, apparently. The thing that's scary about him is, and I'm sure this will be revealed in future episodes, but we really don't know what this guy wants. That's what kind of makes him scary. Obviously, he wants more power, but to what end? Even Peter Baelish in the first season, we get a really long monologue in a brothel that is iconic Game of Thrones for both good and bad reasons. But you kind of like lay out like, oh, this is what this guy is in it for. You understand what he's doing this for. Varys takes a little longer, a couple of seasons, so he was sort of a wild card, but he always seemed like not super scary. This guy, I think the thing that's scariest about him is that we have no idea what, like, is he trying to get the throne? Yeah, Daniel, is he trying to get the hand of the king? Is he trying to take Westeros to war with someone else? Is he trying to get rich? We don't really know what his end game is, which in my mind makes him scarier because he's showing that there's no one on the table that he won't remove from the board if it helps him advance his goals. I mean, he has a whole monologue about how love of a child is like what gets in your way, you know, not quite as iconic as the chaos is a ladder speech, but equally chilling in this way. This guy has there's nothing in him that inspires compassion or love of any kind. But let's go back. The last thing I want to hit on here is that Rhaenyra decides after Sir Harwin Strong departs, one of her sons asks if he is the father. And I don't know, at least my read was this was what really pushed her to go to Dragonstone. So there was all the whispers, you know, in the corridors. She saw Alicent really trying to push her out as fast as possible. She knows that Viserys doesn't have very long, but I feel like this was the moment where when even her own children didn't believe her was when she's like, okay, this is not a safe place for us to be for a variety of reasons, because she doesn't want her kids going around asking these questions in public, but also because she's like, oh my gosh, my own children don't trust me. Daniel, I want to turn to you here. I mean, Rhaenyra is implying here that they're going to need swords in Dragonstone. So do you think this is her just planning for a war? Like in the very short term, because that was kind of the vibe.
Yeah, I think she's definitely preparing. Alicent's been very determined to cast any kind of doubt that she can onto Rhaenyra. And so I do find it interesting that we have both Daemon and Rhaenyra seemingly like, I'll put this in quotations because I think Rhaenyra's motivation is a little bit different, but seemingly like giving up, running away in this episode when they had such a strong bond in the first, few episodes, and they were very like strong, determined characters. But yeah, I mean, I think she definitely expects for some people to follow, and like we've said it, like the writing's on the wall. Like there is going to be, when Viserys dies, like all hell will break loose, and I agree with you. Like she's does seem to be motivated by protecting her family, and this seems to be the move that like she feels like she can protect her family from this place and also be prepared for whatever may come. Obviously, she's going to have her dragons, which we have not seen her interact enough with. So maybe we'll get more of that. But yeah, I think that's sort of her motivation moving forward.
Lainey, what was your take on Rhaenyra's insistence on returning to Dragonstone?
The same thing, preparing for war. The only thing, I think she has just resigned to the fact that obviously the relationship isn't salvageable. And then with the loss of Harwin Strong, that, she's losing allies by staying there versus gaining allies. And so a strategic retreat to Dragonstone allows her to kind of reestablish, even symbolically, that she is the heir to the Iron Throne, because the Dragonstone is the familial seat of the Targaryens. And by taking her place there, she's saying, hey, everyone, remember, I'm the heir to the Iron Throne, not Aegon. And I think that's part of symbolic in that. The relationship with Alicent is not salvageable, and that the inevitable is coming.
Yep. I feel, I felt this every episode so far, like in the last 2 or 3 episodes, where I'm like, I'm waiting for, again, the bottom to fall out, whether it's the king dying or just the war starting to erupt. And man, I feel more confident than not that next episode is going to be a really big one. I'm not saying the war is going to start in the next episode, but I think whatever happens in the next episode is going to jumpstart what happens in the last 3 of the season. And obviously the end of the season is going to set us up for more stories to come as part of the Dance of Dragons. So we're going to wrap up this week's conversation with continuing our news segment here, we're going to award honors to various characters in this episode. So today we're going to award who wins, who loses, and who is the biggest wild card player of the episode. Lainey James, I'll start with you.
Okay, my week's winner is Alicent. You know, she's established that she's been more strategic and aggressive and more powerful, and has more powerful than even she realized with the whole thing with Larys. This week's loser, obviously, Harwin Strong. Wah, wah. It was nice to know you, or not know you in that sense. And this week's wild card, obviously, is Larys. That threw a big wrench in everything.
Yeah, well said. I think those are some great choices. Daniel Stoll, what are your selects?
Thinking forward, I feel like Larys is a big winner, actually, this episode. I feel like he does, as a character, he reveals himself to us, but like he's also put himself in a pretty powerful position that I wasn't expecting. So I put him as the first. And for the week's loser, I put Laena. She does get to make, own her choice, but it was still devastating to lose her character. So I went with her. I struggled with the wild card this week, but I'm actually, this is more of me thinking the results of this episode. I'm going to actually say Daemon. I'm hoping that like his wild card element will come back as a result of this episode. So I feel like he might be, his response might be wild card-ish. So I'm sort of hopeful in that wild card pick for Daemon.
He does end in a position that feels more vulnerable and different than any position we've seen him in so far. So what he does next is...
And so what will that mean for him?
Right.
I think could be very wild card-esque.
Yeah, no, I think I hear you there, and I hope Daemon continues to be a fun wild card, because I did not like Daemon in this episode. He was very boring. Very sad for his loss, though. His wife was awesome, and we did not get enough time with her on the screen. My week's winners is going to be, and losers are similar than Lainey's. Yes, Alicent Hightower's the clear winner for me. She comes out on top. She gets Rhaenyra pushed out of, at the end, Rhaenyra retreats from King's Landing, which is something Alicent wanted. Yeah, Lainey already said it really well. Alicent comes out on top here. I would say this week's loser is actually going to be Rhaenyra, because she starts the episode giving birth, which is yay, glorious, but also ouch, painful. And it had her sort of off kilter for most of the episode. So, I mean, we even see it in the small council meeting where she has the sequence with, where her breast milk is
leaking. Yeah, that's a real thing that happens, by the way. That is a real thing.
I can imagine like how vulnerable it must make you feel. You're in this big meeting with the most important people in the kingdom and that happens, like she felt like she was in a vulnerable position the entire episode. And she didn't come out on top. She loses her lover by the end of the episode. She retreats, and her kids are casting doubt on their own heritage. So, it's not a great week for her. And yes, the wild card player, Larys Strong, I would almost put him as the winner, but as I already detailed, we have no idea what he wants, so I don't know what he wants to win. Therefore, he's scarier as a wild card. I'm going to leave him there until I have a little more understanding on exactly what his aim is. Now, Lainey, I'm glad to hear you picked a special award for this week. It sounds like I did as well. I will do mine first. So for the fourth pick here, my special award was Best Improvement of Hairstyle since the 10-year time jump. And I do have to give it to Harwin Strong. He has quite the Jedi mullet that he's grown in the 10 years. He did not have it quite that long in the last time we saw him, last episode. This week, really poofy, really curly. Good job. It takes some work. It takes a lot of treatment. So that would be my special award for the week. Lainey, what did you pick?
I picked Laena for the most badass dragon rider death anyone could ask for.
Laena. I guess she wasn't that important in the grand scheme, but man, she made a really strong impression in her couple episodes that she got some quality screen time in. All right, so I think that is all we have time for as it relates to the Princess and the Queen. The next episode is titled Driftmark, which is going to, I think, take us back to the home of Laena and Lenore. And I'm curious. I've already sort of shown my hand here a little bit, but Lainey, what are you expecting we may see next week? Obviously, spoiler avoidance, but in terms of are you thinking we're going to see some heads roll next week, or are we still going to be doing this kind of slow build that we've been on?
I think there's going to be starting to shore up allies and renew ties. I think My speculation, because honestly I don't remember, is that Daemon returns to Driftmark, Laenor's there, and then hopefully there's some sort of renewed alliance because of their familial ties. And what I'm hoping for is that Laena's daughter gets her dragon egg, or at least inherits the big dragon.
That'd be cool if she inherited the big dragon. She said it was like one of the biggest dragons like they'd ever seen too, which is pretty cool. Daniel, any thoughts on next week's episode, Driftmark?
Yeah, I think that I kind of alluded to it in my wild card. I think that like Daemon's response is something that I'm really interested in. I hope we get to see a lot of that. Like you said, like back to the Daemon that we sort of had for a love-hate relationship, maybe. I don't know. It depends. I think a lot of people have different feelings on him, but I'd like to see what his response is.
Like I said earlier, I think we're going to start to see some things really start to I think the fuse is going to get really damn close to that powder keg next week before we enter the home stretch of the season. Can you believe next week is already episode 7? Holy cow. I feel like that we just started watching the show and we're already more than halfway through. It's been so much fun so far. Now, listeners, until next time, I want to remind you, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please help us out by rating and reviewing the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also follow the Cast Beyond the Wall on Twitter at cast_beyond_GOT or on Facebook at facebook.com/Cast Beyond the Wall. Lainey James, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to talk House of the Dragon with us. It's been a real pleasure having you back on the show.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see how fiery the rest of the season is.
Lainey, where can people keep up with you and your takes on the internet?
Well, my hot takes on the internet are usually on Twitter at JLanie, JLANIE.
All right. Daniel Stoll, is there anywhere you want to share for the listeners? Have you started your Twitter back up yet? Are you tweeting the rumors of the Queen?
If someone sends me a message on Twitter, I would love that. I would easily respond to that. You can find me on Twitter at Daniel Stoll, STULL, the numbers 23 at the end.
All right. And of course, you can find me tweeting about films, television, video games over on Twitter at CMastersTalk. That's letter C Masters Talk. I also run the film review, film analysis website, thecinematropolis.com. And we have our bi-monthly or twice a month podcast, The Cinematic Schematic. Coming up soon is a review of the Avatar re-release. I have, in fact, seen the Blue People again in the IMAX this last weekend. And let me tell you, got stuff to say. You're going to have to subscribe to the Cinematic Schematic to find out what those are. I did manage to find someone who hadn't seen it, who does podcasts. So that was pretty cool. I didn't know they existed. It was great. Thank you so much for tuning in, listeners, to our recap of this episode of House of the Dragon. Join us next week when we continue going beyond the wall. And until then, don't let love be your downfall.